would like to welcome you to our first IMS Comprehensive Learner Record Roundtable, Learn and Lead at Your Institution. So this is the first webinar, first roundtable in our series, and this one will be focusing on new ways of documenting the student learning record, which is Comprehensive Learner Record. So kind of the what and why of what these CLR records are and what they can do for your institution. This is an event that's co-hosted by both IMS Global and AACRAO, drawing on their experience working with NASPA and the National Institute for Learning Outcomes and Assessment. So I'd like to introduce our presenters at this time. So if Tom, you'll slide to the next slide for me. We have both Jeff Bohrer from IMS Global, who is our technical program manager working in the area of digital credentials. And we have Dr. Tom Green from AACRAO, who's the associate executive director there. And I'm Kelly Hoyland. I'm the higher education program manager with IMS Global, and I'll be serving as your moderator for this event. So feel free to send me any questions you may have. So this is a monthly event that I've mentioned before. This is the first. We'll continue the same cadence of the last Monday of the month at this time of day. We'll do these events, and they'll focus on different types of strategies and designs and implementation advice that we've learned from our partners and from other institutions who've done this. So all of these events will be recorded and posted to our website. So if you don't have this link, I would encourage you to save this link so you can come back to it again to add the future events to your calendar or the recordings. I will put that link to the event in the chat for you. Also, if you haven't signed in yet, please sign in on the attendance form so we can follow up with any of those resources that you may hear about during this session. As I mentioned, as you were joining, you were muted as you came into the room, and we ask that you stay muted while our presenters are speaking. There will be time for questions and answers, so don't feel like your questions won't be answered. If you think you might forget them or you want to put them in chat, we'll kind of curate those questions that come in through chat for those question and answer periods. If you're not familiar with IMS Global, I'll just share a little bit about us. We are a nonprofit EdTech consortium really focused on making better learning happen through better learning technology. So we work with various institutions in K-12 as well as higher education and with our vendor partners to really make that education environment something that works well for you and your students. And with that, I will turn it over to Jeff to share a little bit more about what the CLR is.
Sure, thanks, Kelly. Welcome, everyone. On behalf of IMS, we're just thrilled to have you take time out of your day to learn more about the Comprehensive Learner Record. It's a really exciting time to be, and critical time, arguably, to be working on new ways to recognize learners for their abilities and achievements in order to better serve them as they pursue employment opportunities and further education opportunities for them. It's a very critical time right now. And we believe digital credentials, and specifically the Comprehensive Learner Record, is a very strategic way to meet current and emerging needs for our learners of all types. So the goal here is to create an interconnected ecosystem where educational institutions and other learning organizations recognize learners for their achievements, their capabilities, their skills, and equip them with modern, verifiable digital credentials like the Comprehensive Learner Record to be shared with potential employers and other educational institutions. Next slide, please. Yeah, thank you. So to achieve this goal, IMS is working across all levels of learning. Higher education, K through 12 education, even learning that takes place in the workplace. And as we'll learn about later and through future webinars, you'll see that the Comprehensive Learner Record is designed to recognize learning in all of these settings. So some of the things that we're doing in, well, I should say some of the examples of the CLR in these different areas, starting with higher education, and Tom will go into more detail here in just a moment, but the CLR is a way to recognize learning that takes place in co-curricular experiences and activities, skills and competencies that are picked up by students as they participate in courses, student organizations on their campus, and a whole host of other activities. The CLR is designed to capture what some people call 21st century skills. We prefer employability and life skills terminology, but you get the idea that competencies for the workplace can be captured on these records. And in across higher education, there's a number of initiatives underway to give students experiential learning opportunities, and those skills and experiences can be captured in the CLR as well. In K-12, there's a growing interest in providing students and teachers and parents dashboards that communicate progress towards mastery of standards, of academic standards. There are a number of school districts and state departments of education that are interested in this type of data. Also, K-12 is interested in new forms of competency-based transcripts, mastery-based records of learning. And so the CLR, again, was designed with that in mind. But certainly learning doesn't end in formal education settings. Trainings take place in places of employment. Skills, competencies, certifications are picked up as a person goes through their work life. And so the CLR is also designed to capture learning that takes place in that setting as well. So IMS is focused on this very holistic picture of learning and achievements. And we're very excited to be part of helping to build out this connected ecosystem. So I'd like to turn it over to my friend and colleague, Tom Green, to talk more about some of the specific projects that have been happening across higher education over the last few years. Tom?
Great. Thanks, Jeff. Nice to be with everyone today and to have a chance to talk a little bit about this. I'm reminded, looking at the calendar as we almost come into July 2020, that it was just about 5 years ago at this time that we had our very first conversations in higher education about something that was being called at that time an extended transcript. This idea that in the 21st century, as so many of our documents and technologies had gone from paper to digital forms, what did that mean then for an academic record? And that began this really interesting question that we had to wrestle with about what a record should be or could be in the 21st century. And so as we began to drill down into that information, we had to come to some common understandings about what this record would do, who it's for, etc. So I wanted to share a few of those. One, it's an official institutional record. So it is the same level of credibility and authority as a transcript, which in the United States is the official document that confers student status as to whether or not they hold a credential. In other countries, of course, that's a diploma, which is used to confer that and authenticate that status. But it's issued by the Registrar's office and therefore has to have all of that security around it. It has to have the authority that the institution backs that record and testifies to that student's achievement in these areas. So that was one of the first things that we worked on. As Jeff mentioned in the last slide, we had to, of course, kind of think about, well, what does it include or what could it include? And you're going to see there's some variety here. We're still very early on, if you think about it, in the development of a student record. Just 5 years in is not a long time in higher education for this, but we've come a ways. And I'm going to show you some examples of some of the progress that we've made in these areas. But we know that learning takes place through coursework. Right? That's the most traditional way we think of that. And so we also know that in many instances, and there's growing recognition today, that learning takes place as well outside the classroom through learning that happens, could be supervised by the university. It could be clubs and organizations. It could be internships that are set up through the university. It could be study abroad research opportunities. Those are all ways in which students are achieving learning that really don't become represented in any depth in an academic transcript or a diploma. And then finally, this idea that Jeff touched upon about learning in the workplace. We know today that roughly 90% of our students are working full-time or part-time while in school. And so they're taking some of the learning that they get from us in supervised learning at the college or university, and they're taking that to the workplace. And correspondingly, they're taking that lifetime learning in work and bringing it back into the classroom. And where does that start to fit in and become documented in these records, if at all? And so these are the questions and definitions we've been wrestling with. But one thing is really clear. What we do not need are more rosters of activities. And when we think about a traditional academic transcript, it's very valuable within higher education because it is a roster, a chronological roster of enrollment in coursework. You attempted enrollment in English 1011. If you successfully completed that, you'll have a credit and a grade associated with that. And then on and on and on, we record that information within higher education, and we rely upon that roster of information for how we operate and how we work with students on progress towards degrees. But once we get outside of that higher education setting, and even for our students ourselves, those things are much less meaningful. So the next diagram I'm showing here on the screen is really just another way to try and provide a graphic representation of just what it is we're trying to do. And I think between my graphics and Jeff's more elegant and professionally done graphics, I think you'll get a number of ways of looking at what a CLR is and what it can be. So on the left side of your screen, and I will use this pointer as a way to do that. Over here on the left side of the screen, you see your curricular experiences, the traditional learning that's taken place. But we also know that those courses have learning outcomes, and the programs students are enrolled in have learning outcomes that aren't necessarily tied to the data on these courses. And so as a student enrolls and completes courses, we need to be able to tie learning outcomes to those. Over here on the right side, we also see co-curricular experiences, and you can see samples of what those could be there, but we know that many of those also have learning outcomes that have been designed for them. This is part of what's happened with accreditation movements and greater student affairs work out there, and so we need to tie that data together. Then we need to join those things together in some type of learning framework. And the framework is essentially a summary so that you don't have to read 140 learning outcomes in a document. You can really get a sense of what the institution meant when they said learning. What are the areas of learning that are very important to that institution? And so I've listed here a few of the common ones that are used. AAC and U values rubrics are known as LEAP. There's degree qualifications profile, there's the NACE framework between business, industry, and higher ed, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So we put those into a framework, and then we have to join that securely and accurately to student identity so that you know that the Tom Green, who's in the chemistry club, is the same Thomas C. Green that's enrolled in chemistry 2304 organic, right? And so now that we can join the data together and all of this is in one place, the output of it actually becomes, the kind of, if you will, the technically simpler part of this. Once we've joined, we can do that in degree audits, and we can help students and advisors and faculty track progress in real time towards the degree and these outcomes. We can also output that information into the CLR. Okay, very good. Let me move on here and talk about some of the key concepts that really underpin these new record formats. So one of is that we've got to have the same rigorous structure underneath this that we do for academic coursework. And I like to give the example that a registrar doesn't go back and look at the grades earned in a biology course and look at the assignments and tests to see whether or not that student really got a B. The faculty member relies upon a system where the B awarded by the faculty is a reliable evaluation of learning. And so with that, knowing that, we have to construct the same type of trustworthiness in these records and this infrastructure of learning that can validate the claims that we're making about a student when we issue an official record. We also need to make sure that we can transmit the authority of that record. So why does my university get to say it can award a baccalaureate degree or a graduate credential in something, or an associate's degree, or a micro credential, right? What's the authority under which we get to do that? And so two of those things are typically really important. And one of those is accreditation. Who accredits you to be able to, and that's a quality assurance step. So that could be what was known as the Regional Accrediting Association, the Higher Learning Commission, the Middle States Association, WASC, et cetera. Or it could be the legal authority that allows you to do that. And that's all by state, because in the US, of course, education is the purview of the states. And so each state authorizes an institution to operate. Beyond that, we also know there are levels of authority that are important. For example, if you have a business degree program, you may have AACSB accreditation with that. And so you need to be able to transmit those levels and types of authority that stand behind the degree, in addition to the kind of rigorous infrastructure you need to create for it. And then, of course, we've got to have that learning framework in place. And I'm going to show you some pictures of this that I think make it just a whole lot easier than talking about it. So let me go to that. The self-sovereignty aspect is really important. And this is one that's been, I would say, coming on board more strongly, even in the last couple of years as we've gone into this work. The fact is that we want to give students the ability to have control over their records, meaning that they shouldn't have to come back to the university every time they want a record. They should be able to have a record that's immutable, that they can use, and they can take that and they can use it as they need to over the course of their lifetime. And they should be able to come back to that. But it must mean that the record is tamper evident, that we cannot have the trust that we stand behind the record if the student can change the record after they receive it. So that's currently a technical balance that we're looking to achieve. And then also we want to make sure that the student can use, the learner should be able to use this in part or in whole. So can they disaggregate a degree and just use the parts of it that they need to in the context for which they need to use it? And I'm going to show you some examples of that. But the point is here that each learning experience needs to then be its own complete unit, so that when it is disaggregated, the student could use it and it would still have all of this information behind it that carries the authority, the accreditation, et cetera, with it. Okay. The first record I'm going to show you here, and I'm using an example from Indiana University of what's called a digital credential or digital diploma, an e-diploma. And so what you see here is actually a reproduction of a real diploma. And so this is the diploma you might frame on your wall or get handed at a commencement ceremony. And so it literally is that document, but it's digital and it's in essential a widget. It's got some activity behind it that can take place. And so one of the things we know is that this is the top layer. So if all you need to know is that this student really received a degree from Indiana University in this area, you could easily and quickly verify that claim. And if that's all you needed to know, say an HR office that's just checking credentials, you're done, right? You've achieved your goal and you don't need any more. But let's say, for example, that you're a hiring manager and you now are evaluating this candidate to determine whether or not he, in this case, is really qualified for that job. And so underneath that, now you start to see the framework layer. And I've used the AACNU values rubrics schema here to do this because it's an easy one. It's used a lot by a lot of universities. So we can see here that Indiana University has determined, hypothetically, that these are the areas of learning that they are tracking towards the completion of this credential: critical thinking, written communication, oral communication, information literacy, integrative learning, inquiry and analysis, and then there's the discipline in which the student earned a degree. So that could be biology, could be chemistry, could be nursing, could be architecture, whatever it is. There are a certain amount of specific learning outcomes for that degree path that they're also going to be tracking. So that's the next layer. And then when we go underneath that, you want to ask the question, well, so how did they earn these things? What did they do to achieve these? And this is where we get into really just the tremendous amount of mapping that can go on underneath this. And all of these in the evidence layer that you see here are just hypothetical examples of how the student might have achieved that learning. It could be co-curricular, it could be curricular, it could be a semester at sea, which is a type of internship that the student does. Could be through service learning, academic research, could have even been a competency-based marketing module that the student completed, even through another institution that they brought in and completed towards their degree. But all of these then get mapped towards these framework layers. And now you can dive underneath that and see as much as you want to, or as much as the university may have available in its layer of information underneath this. And of course, now you can imagine there could be hundreds and hundreds of these little atoms, which are here put into this. And the atom is represented there for a reason. And that is that when we think of this, we want to build each of these little pieces, each of these learning experiences as discrete learning modules, as if they are their own atoms. And they're going to have a similar structure of data, but obviously they're going to carry different levels of information, different types of information, but it's a commonly understood structure that we can then take and put into something else. And we're going to show you a little bit more about that as we move along. So what does it look like when it's actually in play? And this is a very good example here from Elon University. And Elon was one of the very early actors in this space of trying to present a CLR in some fashion. And so at Elon, for about 30 years now, the faculty have believed that there are certain buckets or certain areas of learning that are really important, and a student should not graduate from Elon without these areas of learning completed. And so if you look here, what you'll see on top here are research, an internship, service learning, global education, and leadership. And the faculty didn't invent these to have a CLR. The CLR reflected the learning framework that the faculty already held. If we go down at the bottom here, we see also an academic framework, and this represents common learning outcomes of the Elon degree. And so students also complete coursework in these areas, and that is the summary of the learning that Elon believes every student should complete before graduation. You also here get a little bit of a timeline, right? Just to help you see when students completed things. And then up here at the top, you'll see that this is obvious. It's John Doe. It's a fake record here. But you can see you've got the degree, you've got the major, and you've got the date. So you can quickly and easily see that this student has completed this degree that is claimed. And down here at the bottom, you also see the signature of the registrar, just as you would on any official transcript that comes from the university. One thing that Elon did, in partnership with Parchment, by the way, who helped them with this record, was develop a graphic way of looking at this. It's very quick, and people have really liked this. For example, when we think of internships, well, where did they do their internships? So we see the logos here of the companies, which many people quickly recognize: SAS, Ernst & Young. And then if you want to click on the little blue text there, I don't know if you can see that on your screens or wherever you may be, but those are hyperlinks, and those actually took you to the job descriptions. That level of detail was developed after this was drafted and put out as a prototype. And Elon went out to the employment community and they said, does this work for you? Does this show you something about someone who graduates from our university that is helpful to you in the hiring process? And what they said was, it looks good, but it'd be more helpful if we could get a layer of information here that showed us what the student really did in that. Similarly with leadership, right? What did they do in leadership? You claim leadership, but what is the Center for Leadership? So you can click and find out more information. What type of research did they do? How much service and where? Where was that global education? Maybe you're hiring someone who's going to be working with a certain country because so many of our jobs are linked to work outside the United States. It's helpful to quickly see where that learning had taken place. So just wanted to give you that example of it. And then to look at a very different way and look at a very different type of graphic example, also very popular. This is from the University of Central Oklahoma, and they have had a Center for Transformational Learning for a long time. And it is baked into everything they do at that university. And so their record needed to reflect that learning framework and what their faculty believed was important in learning. And so they do theirs a little bit differently. But I think what you'll see here is the same theme, that you've got these major areas: global and cultural competency, health and wellness, leadership, research, creative and scholarly activities, service learning, and civic engagement. And you can also link from this right to the students' e-portfolio, which is a platform they use in order to have students more thoroughly document some of their experiences. They also did something which is pretty cool here, which is these little chevrons that you can see in color, measure the level to which the student did that, or the intensity of effort that student made in these areas. So if you're a hiring manager out there and you're looking for someone who's got great background in global and cultural competency, you can see here this student has a lot of it. There are different levels to it. Did the student just get exposed to it, or did they really show evidence of learning from it? Can they apply that learning in new situations? In other words, have they synthesized the learning to be able to adapt that to new constructs? You can gain all of that through this type of document. So a good colleague of mine always said, show them a picture quickly with this, because once you see the picture, you start to understand what these CLRs can be, what they can contain, and then start to get some ideas about how they can be used. So with that, I'm going to turn this back over to Jeff.
Thanks, Tom. Great depiction of some of the projects that have been underway over the last few years through the AACRAO-led initiative. Getting back to sort of the technical lens or the ecosystem lens, I wanted to remind everyone that the vision, as Tom described, is indeed for the learner to be in control of their credentials for easy sharing. And so it's at these points of sharing where the data is in transition that interoperability is important. So it's one thing for educational institutions to create these wonderful human readable documents, but it's another thing to create a machine readable data file that goes along with that human readable layer, so that platforms can exchange the data as the learner sees fit and as the learner authorizes and controls. And that's all about data interoperability. And it's absolutely crucial that in this emerging world of sophisticated artificial intelligence systems, sophisticated applicant tracking systems, when people submit their applications for employment positions, it's crucial that we've got data that can be consumed in a way where people can be discovered for opportunities that they may not even have thought that they were qualified for. So it's at these sharing points or transition points where data interoperability is very important. So imagine a student applying to college. So they're taking their data issued from their school district or their high school, and they're submitting it to the college admissions office. Or a student that's going from college to employment, maybe I should say full-time employment, to Tom's point earlier that 90% of our students are already working. But as they take their learner records from the university to a potential employer, the data must be consumable and in a common format that can be understood by these emerging applicant tracking systems. And as a worker moves on in their professional journey from employer to employer, their learning and competency records also need to be able to be moved. So again, data interoperability is absolutely crucial here. And it's achievable when all the tools and platforms that are supporting this process are working with that common data standard. So just real quickly, IMS is working, again, very hard at supporting this emerging ecosystem. We have a number of initiatives underway that are working to build out demonstrations, examples, production level readiness of these platforms. Of course, and we'll talk about this in just a few minutes, but the underlying foundational piece is a common data standard, and that's the CLR 1.0 standard from IMS that's available today. In the K-12 world, we've been approached for a partnership on a project called Pivot, which is designed to put new forms of learner records, specifically the CLR, into the hands of K-12 students. In higher education, of course, as Tom mentioned, we're working to support a number of initiatives from universities that bring in their technology partners to develop new forms of records based on the CLR standard. We're very excited to have probably 8 to 10 different early adopter institutions and technology companies right now working to implement the standard. And then in the workforce space, we also have an initiative called Project Wellspring that is working to bring together educational institutions and their employer partners to build out portions of this ecosystem, from competency frameworks that are digitized, that provide the atomic level of data that Tom was describing previously, to building out prototype tools, reference implementations that connect educational institutions through the learner to the learner's employment systems that they want to share their data with. So we're active in all these spaces with a number of projects on all fronts. Tom, I know AACRAO's been describing the ecosystem on the next slide in a variety of ways, and maybe on top of the platforms I mentioned, you may layer on social media, it looks like.
Yeah, we really wanted to in a sense, represent graphically here in pictures how we might see a learner taking her records and using those. And we had the idea of the atom here, but we also wanted to then say, well, that could be reconstituted, if you will, or put together in different ways. And so those might be thought of as molecules, right? The different ways you can put together different atoms to create molecules. So let's say that she just needs, right, a badge, a micro-credential. A part of that record might be called a skill stamp, different terms that we're seeing out there in the marketplace. And so she's going to take that. Maybe she wants to put that out on LinkedIn to, you know, kind of wave out there to everyone that she has this certification or qualification in a way that might enable her to be discovered by someone who's out there mining that data in LinkedIn or other social media to be able to contact her and say, hey, I see you have this qualification. Did you realize there's an opening in this field? So much of the searching going on in workforce today is using that kind of information and platform to be able to find potential employees for positions. She may then want to take that digital diploma, that early one I showed you from Indiana University, and she may want to apply that and go to graduate school. And so, or transfer from one institution to another. Maybe that digital diploma was from a community college and she wants to go to a four-year institution. And so she wants to send that directly to that institution so they have it. Or she may want to have her entire CLR with that summary of learning, et cetera, the more robust type of document, another way of recombining those atoms into molecules. And she may want to send that off to that institution, or she may want to be using that directly with an employer. Maybe she's made it to the second round of hiring and now wants to be able to supplement the job application or resume with more validated learning stood behind. The claims are now backed by this CLR. But on the right side of this, we also recognize that for quite a while now, we've been able to move data files between colleges and universities as a data stream. You didn't have to send a paper transcript or even a PDF of a transcript. You could just actually send the data stream across. And so we want to make sure that in this ecosystem, that is enabled, that the learner can say, send my associate's degree from Ivy Tech to IU Bloomington, and it goes right across as a digital file, a digital data stream. There's going to be tremendous power in that. And then similarly, we see that in the future working between higher education and applicant intake systems at hiring, so that we can send that same file over and it could be read by those intake systems and they would know immediately, okay, we validated this. Here's all the information on the different experiences the student has, and now we can use that in our application intake process to evaluate candidates for positions. So just a different way, a different graphic way of representing kind of what we see as the possibilities of this ecosystem on where it's headed. But obviously, one of the big things that's so important in this, that we just want to come back to, is that we have to have a standard. We have to send all this information across on standards, because as we began the work 5 years ago, we weren't quite sure what these records would become. So we didn't have a standard at that point. We weren't even sure what we would be standardizing. But in the last few years, very quickly, a number of institutions are now implementing these and issuing these to students. And what we can't have are 1,000 one-off record types. They have to have common data standards and formats so that we can transmit these things back and forth across these systems, and they can be machine readable. I can ingest them into my system, somebody else can ingest them into theirs, and we would know what the information was in those molecules or atoms and be able to understand that information as we receive it. So to that end, last fall, IMS Global released the 1.0 IMS, the CLR standard. And that was the first one that we had looked at and said, this appears to have the components in place to allow this type of information to flow across these systems in the ecosystem that we were envisioning in that graphic. So that had been developed by IMS Global. We certainly knew it was being developed, and they'd asked a few people to take some early looks at it before they published it. But it really hadn't had that larger kind of community vetting of a standard that we know is an important part of it. So we AACRAO worked with IMS Global, and we created an impartial review of the standard. What we have recommended, what we come away with from that review is that today it's the only standard available that meets the needs of being able to be transmitted across a network and be able to be consumed by another recipient. We also know, and from that review, we knew in that this is a very flexible standard, and it is flexible because it can take in so much additional information on learning beyond what a transcript would have carried in the past. And so because of that, the interpretation of how data on learning will be applied into the standard is going to be very, very important for its usage. So we are taking the next step in this, and we're working with IMS Global, and we're creating a review team with AACRAO and NASPA representatives to be able to look at an implementation guide and develop use cases for how different types of learning and different types of institutions will take their data and will apply it into the CLR standard. And from that, that will serve as a guide for people in higher education who say registrars, IT professionals, student affairs professionals, academic affairs professionals. How will the learning data that they are collecting on their student experiences now be interpreted into the standard so the student has the ability to take this, be self-sovereign, and be able to use this in the way that we envision in this ecosystem. I also want to highlight that one of the important networks that IMS Global and AACRAO and others are involved with, and many of you in this call may be involved with this as well, is the T3 network. And this is a coordination effort by the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. And they are trying to work with both the federal government, business and industry, higher education, the military, all these actors, and be able to try and coordinate these in what's being labeled, if you will, an ILR, or interoperable learning record. It's a little bit of a confusing title, if you will, because CLRs are by their nature interoperable. If you can't have it be interoperable, it really doesn't meet the standard of being a CLR. And so therefore, just watch for that in the nomenclature. Remember, this is still an emerging area, and ILR, CLR, essentially, we're talking about the same thing, but ILR probably means it expands the scope to think about how not only higher education and post-secondary technical education will use this, but what about the military, corporations, et cetera. And also, there have been significant efforts by different worldwide research universities to create a digital records consortium. And MIT is probably the most vocal and leading institution in the United States. But these are universities, major research universities across the globe, that are looking at how this information might flow across different landscapes, not only our ecosystem, but how will this then create a global digital shared network, and how will these records be able to be interchanged worldwide. There's another organization here to watch, and that's the Groningen Declaration Network, which similarly has been involved with student mobility and digital credentials for about the last decade. Okay, great. I'm going to turn it back over now. And Kelly, if you'd like to take over.
Yeah, there was some great information that you guys both shared. We had a couple of questions already come in. One was, how are open badges and CLR different, the same? How do they work together? So if we want to touch on that briefly, probably Jeff.
Yeah, I can take that one. So those are two different types of digital credentials. Open badges, developed originally by Mozilla years and years ago, has been stewarded by IMS Global for the last 3.5 years. That really is the world's leading format for digital badges. So platforms that are in the business of creating badges, whether it's a badge platform or a learning platform, they build their badges according to that standard. The comprehensive learner record has a kind of a different origin, but again, that's a collection of achievements, multiple achievements, where typically a badge represents a singular skill or achievement. We've gone to great lengths to harmonize those two standards so that badges, and specifically open badges, can be represented and listed, included as achievements within a student's CLR as well. So there is some harmonization going on, but they're separate kinds of artifacts with separate standards.
Okay. And then we had a question about how does the CLR fit into the mix with the former interoperable learning record, which is now the Learning and Employment Record, the LER from the American Workforce Policy Advisory Board.
I'll take that one, and then Jeff, please feel
Mhm.
free to add on to this. So we have been working very, very closely with the workforce initiatives coordinated by T3. And I would say the couple things to recognize here, that higher education was a bit first out of the gate, if you will, in this area, that we had developed more definitions, we had more models, we had done more work with it. And so as it became a broader conversation about learner records and where learning was taking place, what about workforce learning, what about military learning, et cetera, various names started to appear, ILR, LER, those type of things. But really, when you think about it, CLR fits within that. Think of that as perhaps an umbrella term that represents all types of digital learning records. And CLR is the most evident of those. It's the one that's actually the most developed and most present and being issued today. And as others come in, military, that could be through mill gears, it could be through a new JST. As we get employment certifications that become digital, then we'll see those kind of come underneath the umbrella, but all be joined together across common frameworks and common standards. Jeff, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, well said. I would just add that really today, CLR is the only technical specification available for developing these types of learning records. We think that it's flexible. A number of use cases have been studied and analyzed. So if you're embarking on a project regarding new forms of learner records, take a look at the standard. We'd be very interested in hearing about use cases that may not be supported by it currently. But as Tom mentioned, it is quite flexible for all forms of learning recognition. Good question.
Great. We have a couple more that have come in. So what tools are available for organizations that may want to get started generating CLRs for their learners? Must they start from the implementation guide and slog through it? What are some of those things that are available?
Oh, I love that question. Do you have to slog through the implementation guide? The answer is no. We at some point you will probably have to do that, but that would probably come a ways down the line. Start with our website at AACRAO, AACRAO.org, and go under Signature Initiatives, and you will see the Comprehensive Learner Record there, and there are a number of resources there, including the complete report from Phase 1, which ended in 2017. It's got examples, it's got institutions that have CLRs. There's a good network going on right now. And of course, if you're an institution thinking of implementing CLR right now, we encourage you to reach out to AACRAO, contact us, and we can give you even more specific information and connect you to colleagues who are already implementing these records and using them with their students.
Yeah, Kelly, maybe that is a good segue to just jump to the next slide, because it has a URL we want to make sure people have at their fingertips. imsglobal.org/CLR is your gateway into the technical information about adopting the standard in your product, or as an institution that's looking for products to support your initiative. You can learn about the standard and advocate for it and work with your technology provider to align with it. IMS does provide some developer tools, some prototype tools, some reference implementations. So if time is short and we don't have the ability to give you further URLs, connect with this one, connect with IMS, and we will give you a consultation on how to get started adopting the standard.
We also had a question about the word comprehensive is catching some people, trying to understand how different records would be pulled into one. So if you have multiple undergraduate and a graduate and an industry certification, how do they end up on a single one, or do they end up on a single CLR?
Oh, that's a great question. So, and one that I don't think is actually completely answered yet today. But I think that where we are right now is that we know, for example, if you have a higher education record, so you attended Hines Community College in Alabama, and they issued you a CLR that reflects the learning that you did there at that institution. That in of itself, right, is a complete document. And you can't add to that yourself, and you can't have an employer add to that without Hines evaluating that learning and standing behind it. So it's the authority piece of this that's really important to remember. That if you want to have a record that you can believe is real, and you can believe that the learning behind it has been assessed and validated, it has to come from that institution that can do that work. So what we believe will probably happen is that people will have a collection of these, and over their lifetimes, they may need to request disaggregated parts of them, badges, et cetera, that type of thing. They may be collecting them from business and industry, from higher education, from different institutions in higher education, maybe from the military, and that they would put these somewhere. And I'm going to use the term wallet and then ask Jeff to maybe speak a little bit more about that concept. But a place that you could access these as a self-sovereign way and use them as you need it.
Yeah, again, spot on description, Tom. So, right, imagine a learner receives a CLR from their higher education institution and also one from their place of employment as they experience trainings and different learning opportunities. So we imagine in this ecosystem of tools that wallet type tools, academic portfolio type tools will emerge that support these CLRs. And the standard is designed in a way to allow tools to be built that can do really interesting things with the data from those CLRs. So customized views or presentations of data can be given out to select audiences. Verification can take place. Evidence of that learning, the artifacts that are created along the way that show evidence of that competency or that achievement can be shared and included in that record. That's all possible through the applications, the tools that are being built now to support the underlying data. So yeah, we refer to them as wallets. There's a lot of work being done in both native mobile wallets and web-based applications that function like wallets. We're pretty excited about the future of those tools.
Good. There was only one other question, and then we can finish up our last little bit of information. So is there any value for an institution or learner in generating a CLR that doesn't have anything besides your traditional course data?
Oh, a tremendous value there because, and in fact, that may be one of the least harvested areas of this. And I'll make this a short answer, or this could be a very long answer, but when we think about what having a degree really means, if you go back within many of our lifetimes, going to college was a rare event. It didn't happen very often. It only happened for a certain select portion of our society that went to school. And so therefore having a degree meant a lot, right? And so a transcript though was really just a way of identifying what you took in that degree. And it was, as I said, really meant for the academy. It wasn't meant for outside consumption. And even if you look at transcripts today, because many of the platforms make you truncate and shorten course titles to fit into that transcript format, you can barely tell what the course is. So what's underneath that though, and what we haven't done a good job yet in communicating about higher education is exactly what we do every day. We teach, we evaluate learning, we provide evidence that someone has learned something before they're allowed to progress to the next level of learning. All of that data, all that information is out there and available in increasingly digitized formats. But we haven't yet express the value of that degree in a way that really helps people understand it. We've just said, hey, they've got a credential, and so you should believe that they're ready for work. And so that has, one of the areas where we think there's just a lot more to say and a lot more value to be expressed in higher education than simply awarding a diploma or a degree.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and one thing we didn't really touch on are the representation of alternative credentials like certificates and badges and micro credentials that are coming out of continuing education. And the CLR is well positioned to be an official record of that type of learning at minimum. Mm-hmm.
All right, we have just a couple minutes left. So before I get to any other questions, I just want to remind you that we will have another roundtable next month. It'll be focusing on hearing from institutional leaders who've implemented a CLR program on their campus. We have 3 panelists who will join us and be kind of sharing what they've learned, tips and tricks for starting, and really, giving you time to ask questions about what's going on. Just a reminder, if you want to sign in to our meeting attendance, then I can follow up with the recording as well as any of the resources we shared. So please do that. I will throw it in the chat one more time. And then I also did include the link to our public event page, because that's a way for you to even sign up for the next one. If you want to submit questions for the next panel, you can do that ahead of time on that roundtable website as well. Otherwise, I would like to thank both Jeff and Tom for sharing their knowledge today. I think this was really good. Lots of information shared with these individuals, and we had some good conversation. So thank you all.
Thanks for the opportunity to be able to share this information. It's important to help us disseminate the information, not only to our audiences within AACRAO, but to audiences in higher education and beyond, so that we can get more and more people involved in creating, implementing, and using CLRs.
Thank you.
Thanks everyone for your time and participation today. Look forward to seeing you again.
Great. Thank you, everyone.